the four gentlemen on my right are David Ross from DNB, Dimitri Anagnostopoulos from ABB, and now but also from many other banks in the past. Michael Visser for IBC, and George Xiradakis XRTC, so we have all the initials you like, to answer these questions. And the first one, I guess, is we know that the European banks are much less active in the scene, but do we think that this is a final result? Are they gone for good, or is that a temporary phenomenon? Being the first European banker on my far left, David, would you like to make it going? You are the biggest lender from what we saw, global lender in shipping. So you clearly are around, but do you think that the European scene has changed for good, or is this a temporary phenomenon that will jump back to what it used to be?
I didn't have the benefit of seeing the graph earlier, but
take my word, you're good number one.
Okay. All right. I think, first of all, I'll make an obvious statement here, and that is that shipping is a cyclical business. I say it's an obvious thing to say, but I think perhaps some of our banking compatriots forget this from time to time. But it's very natural that the number of banks active in the sector will fluctuate with the shipping side. So we shouldn't forget that. Of course, shipping is very capital intensive for the banks today, at a time when most banks are trying to deleverage their balance sheets, mostly in Europe because of the banking crisis which we've had there, and which continues to persist. So I don't think there's any great surprise that some banks want to reduce their exposure to shipping today.
You don't think so?
It's any surprise that some banks will want to reduce their exposure to shipping.
But do you think this is a temporary phenomenon, or do you think it will jump back?
Well, you mentioned that we're the biggest bank by lending capacity. We're also a fairly sizable bank in the syndication market as well. And I think it's very notable that a number of Asian and US banks are stepping into the market today, filling the gap to some extent, but not completely. And if you want to analyse the market even further, I'd say that there's certainly a big flight to quality, as usual in difficult times. So a lot more competition for the top names, less interest for complex structures or less well-known ship owners, and there isn't going to be enough bank capacity for what we've seen. We wish there were. Everyone was following our model. Perhaps things will be a little bit different, but even if there were, there's going to be a gap. And I think ship owners need to look at different ways to fund their growth, for example, in the private equity markets. We saw Costa Mare, press release yesterday about a partnership with your capital, for example, in the equity and capital markets. We have been very active there recently with the third equity product, which Tsakonas launched a couple of weeks ago, and there will hopefully be a few more in the pipeline as well for different owners. And the debt capital markets, Norwegian bonds, but these products obviously cost more than ship owners are used to paying for shipping debt.
Thank you. Michael, would you like to comment on the European banking scene? I know you're active in shipping, and you intend to continue to be active in shipping, but do you think that this reluctance of a number of traditional shipping banks in Europe to lend the last few years will continue, or do you think it's a temporary phenomenon?
Well, like David said, it is a cyclical business, so shipping ultimately those banks will come back. Yeah, but we also learned yesterday that it will take 2 to 3 years before banks.
Yeah, you speak because they cannot hear.
They will, of course, take 2 to 3 years to recapitalize their balance sheets. And in the meantime, banks have stepped in. We also have capacity to lend, but we don't have, of course, the capacity similar to banks who have stepped out of that business. But if you look at the top 20 of banks, where a lot of these banks are European, most of those European banks are still open. I think only Commerzbank really indicated that they want to get out of the business, but all the other banks, and we have seen this morning that they might have reduced their portfolios, but they're still doing new business. And indeed, it is a flight to capital, but it's also a flight to common sense transactions. So they will come back.
Until they do, George, do you see any Asian banks? I know that you're very active in the Asian market. Do you think that Asian banks will
I'm going to tell you a few words afterwards about China in the next questions. But let's see what is happening in the European banking sector and for the ship lending. There are severe problems in the balances of the banks. There are restructurings from the foundation till whatever you want, even on the secretariats. There are restructurings, etc. Certainly for any bank, for Europe, the European problem at this very moment is more social rather than business. I mean, let's say the way that we are thinking about Europe. What we are trying to do as Europeans is we are trying to eliminate the fear of unemployment, which is increasing every day, etc. So here ourselves, we are a small community in the business of the business world that we are talking about shipping and shipping financing. Shipping financing, take it or leave it, is a cyclical market, is very specialized, is something, if I can say for the European banks, a luxury to be in. The good thing, however, is that, that we have a very nice rule. The rule is that the banks are still there, as Michael and David said. They are supporting through restructuring the existing projects, and they have not followed the example of the cycle of 80s or even before with forced sales that would have created a big problem in the values of the industry. And at the same time, they still start opening a bit of a small room for new business, as both our European colleagues said. The issue here is that whether we have other banks coming into the picture. I mean, Professor Petropoulos in his, I was telling him that I was giving an interview earlier this morning, and I called him as the statistical pop of shipping industry, not only for Greece, worldwide. And with his job that he has done in the last 30 years, we have at least the room to analyze. And thank you very much, and I want to tell you, say this publicly. So, he has noticed that there are some newcomers. Of course, the one known newcomer is China. What I want to say, and to add up on what Michael said, is that we do have another bank, another financing industry market, which is something like the accordion, that you play. It's the American, the US. Well, you are from an American bank, the only stable American bank, Citibank, and then after that we have those people that they are coming when they see the lamp being ready, during the Greek Easter, that, there are visitors that are coming just 5 minutes before we take off from the fire, or the kokoretsi, and they leave just before the street because they don't like the streets. And this is what I'm telling you, the street, just before the uprise of the market again. So we do have now here new American money coming into shipping in different forms. In forms of equity, in forms of other things. And I believe and agree with the potentials described by Mr. Petropoulos and by many others, that the newcomers that we would expect from now on, they're going to be mainly from the Americas. Then after that we have the Asia. Yes, mainly from the US.
Dimitri, may I ask you, you have the longest banking experience of all of us. You've seen the 80s, you've seen the 90s, so you've seen also the cyclicality of the banking market.
Yeah, it's not a compliment about my age, but...
No, it's a compliment about your experience.
Indeed.
As soon as you are still here,
yeah, that's positive.
For criticism.
Absolutely correct. Well, if somebody takes the example of the 80s, the slightest problem, the slightest default, was ending into banks repossessing the assets, auctioning the vessels, etc. Those days, banks had the absorption capacity to sustain losses. These days, we don't see too many auctions in the Lloyd's list. There used to be 2 or 3 pages in the 80s. Banks, whenever they want to take a loss, automatically they have to take the hand and go to the corresponding central bank, ask for assistance or for capital. Therefore, that's why we see a slower motion. They try to restructure, they restructure again, and then of course it's a common secret that a lot of banks they do the famous haircuts into transactions. I have witnessed a great number of haircuts that they are not so much publicly advertised, but indeed that takes time. 1 year that takes some reserves in the balance sheets, the banks, and then gradually they do the famous accounting entry, and the loss is registered but has been provided for. Therefore, this is the situation. So we live in a different era than the 80s. Of course, banks, they're not all the same. But in Europe, where the European banking system has largely financed ships the last 20 years, in contrast to the American banks that they were financing in the 80s, now the scene is a little bit different, but since shipping it's very open in the globalization, was always a globalized industry. I think balances will come back again, and natural forces of the market, both, I'm not talking about the freight market, but I'm talking about the stability of the financing system, will stabilize eventually. But this instability has created the chase for different sources of financing, etc. And one last point I want to mention is that there are a great number of ship owners that they don't count on IRRs and returns on equity, etc. They have cash, they buy the ships cash, they think it's very expensive to borrow money, and these are much more of what we think, and sometimes we don't even hear of them. So this is what
they're acting on their own, using only equity, you mean?
Exactly.
Yeah. So I would guess that the combined feedback on the question is that the European banking scene will eventually jump back to more activity, from what I gather from...
after many haircuts, especially the German banking system.
Yes, some pain will have to be...
stabilize.
Yes. But until it does stabilize, George, please do tell us about the Chinese banking market.
I mean, just you have Dimitris talking about this. He could continue with Chinese because he's also involved there. Not as much as me, but in any case, yes, another newcomer in the market is China, and it's not a newcomer that's coming just an opportunistic way. I mean, it's coming here to stay, and they came on a very, very solid and correct manner, if I can say, after studying the market, after studying what they're gonna earn from this involvement, and of course respecting very much, it's the sole, if I can say to me because I'm younger, the sole industry that respects what we call the win-win marketing approach. China is not in the international market just to grab and make some money during the opportunistic period. Is coming here to stay. Is coming, you can easily justify that China is in the market simply because they want to ensure that it's going to be a smooth operation of the international shipping shipping market. Don't forget that China appears as the facturer or the industrialist of the world economy, being responsible for the 60% of the world trade, either inbound or outbound. And at the same time, China has become a leading shipbuilding industry. Therefore, they cannot escape from providing providing financing. But from the other side, financing is not something that you are buying and you are selling. It's not trading. It's a matter of experience, it's a matter of knowledge, it's a matter of structuring your departments within the bank. And I have to tell you, because I am in China working for the ship finance sector even before their announcement of the internationalization effort of their state-owned banks, they have developed nicely their ship financing market, and I encourage all of you, international banks, national banks, small banks, consulting companies, etc., to be closer to this market. The market is starving and needs to have experience next to them. There is a problem, however, that because of the Chinese law, Chinese banks, they cannot pay a foreigner. That is to say, even Michael, or if they want to work in a Chinese bank, you cannot be paid. You can go there and say, you might have, yes, you might work for free. This is something that eliminates their capacity to penetrate quickly the international market. But from the other side, and this is something that I'm saying very openly, not only here but everywhere, I do not see lack of their capacity in analyzing the shipping risk. To the contrary, I see sometimes that I'm very lucky that I'm very close with China and with Chinese banks, because in certain cases they can foresee what's going to happen in the short future better than myself, or better than ourselves being in Europe. Which don't forget that we are living in a misery period. And I remember that I was with Orestes Giokas traveling to China sometimes, and on the way back I spoke to him and said, how did you feel in China? Because he goes very often there. When you are in China, you feel about Europe a misery. We are fighting with each other we are still in the political scene, particularly here in Greece, on this matter. There is the new world now. They are developing business, and they are trying to develop business correctly in the shipping financing arena. They are going to be leaders, but they won't be leaders in the next couple of years. They are going to be leaders long run. And allow me to say that it took me about 4 years now, 5 years, to work hard with my partners. I woke up 3 days, working days a week, at 3 o'clock to work up to 5:30 in order not to lose the day. And then I sleep again, and my partner Katerina that came here, she is shouting to me that I'm going very late in my office. Okay, in order to cope with them. And we have given what? About 600 million. Right?
Well, it's not significant.
Right, but it's not money.
Dimitri, I wasn't aware personally of your Chinese involvement, so I apologize for that. But
I can tell you things.
The question is, following what George said, do you think that George described a very well-structured approach in their entrance to the market? Currently, the common impression is that the Chinese banks are lending only to deals that have a Chinese flavor, one way or another. Do you think this is changing? Do you think Chinese banks or Asian banks overall becoming more mainstream in the shipping banking scene? Because financing new buildings clearly is a very important thing per se. But the breadth of services eventually gets much further than that. Do you see that happening eventually?
Well, you touched the right point. I mean, there must be a Chinese element. I don't know of any Chinese transaction that had no Chinese element. And when I'm saying element, should either be a Chinese shipyard, or a charter, or a classification society. I think major banks in China are politically driven, and they are thirsty to learn the business because they don't know. They need the expertise to deal with international ship finance transactions. And I don't know, and maybe George knows more, if there is a long-term commitment to the fact that they will play at arm's length a business view of dealing generally with shipping risk, respective to the Chinese element or not. Until now, Chinese element is a must for doing business with a Chinese bank. This is my view.
I agree with you. Nevertheless, there are non-Chinese element transactions taking place, particularly in the leasing structure. Both ICBC leasing and the CDB leasing have done this, certainly at the benefit of an investor related to China. The focus there is, first, to support the shipbuilding industry, second, to support the Chinese international trade, but also they are in the process, and I have to tell you, I am 100% sure that's going to happen in the next 24 months, that they have understood that without being able to deal with international banks on an equal partner, not as a participant as it has happened so far, on an equal partner, and to deal with financing of international shipping companies, they will not be able to sustain and play a leading role in the market, which is ultimately is the Chinese target. All right. Don't forget that here in Greece, being one of the world's largest ship owning center, okay, there is no week that we don't have a delegation from a Chinese bank. There is a part of the fact that we have local people that they are staying here in following up the Chinese market, like China Development Bank Ningbo, that is here, Ningbo branch, which is China Development Bank. We have other people, anchor people like from Bank of China, that nobody knows. We have people from the Minister of Finance of the local Minister of Finance of Shanghai. So they are here, and progressively they will develop. But at this very moment, full stop, Chinese element is the must.
Yeah, well, that's also what we see in transactions, that it needs to be Chinese yard, Chinese ship, Chinese charter. What we see in the transactions is that there is a high level of professionality at the counterparty. However, it takes time. We did a transaction whereby we had an approval in 3 weeks, European owner. It took 9 months. And I don't know what happened there, but what I understood is that
have you heard about
there are no priorities.
Have you heard about the minimum time of transaction in Germany at the moment?
Are there any?
If there is,
because
they get the approval from the government.
In order to get all newcomer, this is very nice, because the 3 weeks of the past have become 3 months or 4 months. That is 10 times, I think 5 times more.
All banks are now much more.
But I fully agree with Michael.
But all
our
banks.
first transaction took place in 17 months. But it was a good transaction at the end, because it was a milestone transaction. It was signed in front of the Prime Minister. It was the base of the Prime Minister of China to announce the 5 billion ship financing scheme. And it's 17 months though. And you know something, if you see the statistics, sometimes I have reported, I don't know whether it was in this conference in the past, there were approximately 3,400 mails, okay, alright, and not to say how many trips of my team in China, not to say how many trips of the Chinese people in Greece. But the last transaction that we did, and we got an approval in less than 3 months.
That is very encouraging. But as I said, in all, I think banks globally, the approval times have increased materially.
But Chinese financing, you cannot do it from a distance. You have to have either a local or someone that he knows the market.
Local from China. Yeah.
Local, your Greek anchor there.
Yes.
The other side.
Until Chinese financing becomes more mainstream, which it seems it's heading this way. Michael, how do you think that European banks will fare in between, the sense that we see a number of banks that they have problematic loans, some of them more than others? Do you think that the impairments, the losses they will have, they already have or will have, will discourage them from becoming again more active once the shipping market stabilizes or starts improving again?
Well, obviously, board members don't like impairments in shipping because then they really think that it is a very difficult business to be in. On the other hand, what we see is that most of the transactions where, compared to other activities in the bank, most of the transactions where we had a situation with increased monitoring of the risk, ultimately it went okay. So the number of impairments, and I have to say we are quite lucky that in 2007-2008 we as a bank had our difficulties and did not do so many ship financings. So in 2009, 2010, 2011 we grew our book, and those transactions are fairly okay still. So we don't have the difficulties compared to German banks. But what we see is that ultimately the trust in the shipping portfolio is quite high. How that works in other banks, yeah. If you have to, I guess they're closely monitoring the impairments because of the fact that the capital buffers that they have are so thin. They don't have the capacity. They don't have the capacity at this moment to do those impairments. You see now the warehousing. You see the good bank, the bad bank. I don't see so many impairments. If you look at the German bank with 100 billion of US dollars or euros, whatever currency they calculate.
That's the discussion we had also before.
You don't see so many impairments, and we know that the KG market is the biggest problem there is. So where are those impairments?
It's more or less the discussion we had before with the accounting side and the...
Nobody's touching it.
Yeah. Well, if the regulator allows you not to, then you're not necessarily...
Certain.
David, you have a view on that? So,
I actually want to wind back a little bit, if I may, because I think the Chinese discussion is very relevant here, and I think, as you mentioned, DNB has a big presence in the market. And, we see the Chinese and Korean banks, especially export credit agencies, as very important source of capital for the shipping industry. And as an example, we've worked a lot with China Exim in the Greek market, as George well knows, and I think it's fair to say we have a pretty common strategy, conservative, discreet lending to solid Greek ship owners. They have a very experienced relationship team with very knowledgeable people above them as well. And we've structured around $2 billion of export credit agency debt for Greek ship owners in the last 2-3 years. And I think it's interesting to say that of the approximately, 17 or 18 deals that I've seen reported in Lloyd's list over the last 2 or 3 years, 12 of those have been led by DNB in the Greek market for Chinese and Korean export credit agencies. So they are certainly here. I think they're very knowledgeable compared to where they were when we started our discussions sometime after George, 3, 4, 5 years ago. And I believe that they will stay as well.
That's a good point. Obviously,
and very solid relationship, something. David is the man that he can, what he said is to verify. I wish I was in a common joint meeting between DVB and Exim Bank. You will not understand who is the expert of shipping. Both of them are experts, and they communicate very easily.
That's very encouraging.
Which is not the case, for instance, in Korea, because the Korean banks that they are there for years, leaving aside the export, the K-Sur or the Kexim, the Korean Exim Import Bank, okay, that they do have a shipping.
Yep.
Common. If you go to speak, I passed from Korea last January when it was, just to speak with some friends that we used to work together when I was in Credit Lyonnais, but they are in different banks. We are not allowed to see international ship finance arena. Right?
But that reflects, I guess, also capital structures.
Yeah. Anyway, Dimitri, without want to intervene on you, I want to say that I was impressed with the first page of Lloyd's list of yesterday on the move of Commerzbank. And certainly, more than myself, there are people that are heavily impressed, like Dimitri and Ted, that they are, many more years in the market than me. That we see now, we notice, that banks, they do dare to become owners. not on a permanent basis, but if you are married and you have the first girlfriend, you never know when you stop. You cannot stop with the first one, right? Or boyfriend if you are a woman. So there is we just start making an omelette. We smash the eggs. We have a formal announcement of a major German bank, very important banking group, that support heavily the Greek economy, the Greek shipping bank, the Greek shipping, Commerce Bank including Deutsche Bank, that they have announced that they are forming a new company to own the vessels up to the time that the market will increase, and this company will be headed by a senior banker belonging to the group.
But that would not necessarily mean new money. That is a way to deal with the problems.
No, but doesn't mean, but this is a platform that covers the market from a potential explosion that would lead to the drop of the values and the impairment. Because even Frau Merkel at that time, they will force you to take impairment, to change the law.
I fully agree that it indeed helps in the impairments. However, at the same time, you will see that their debt or their commitment to that ship, which is in the warehousing system, does not reduce. Their capital requirements to that ship will remain the same, and they will not be able to lend new money, because in order to lend new money, you will have to lower your capital committed to that industry.
Yeah, I don't think that right now, I mean, you're right, it's a different model what you describe, but I don't think it will add new capacity in the very near future. I don't know if you want to open up the discussion.
They have to discuss.
Sorry, please.
Well, there are some distinct examples in the last couple of months of banks, well-known banks, that are entering into transactions as follows. They have a loan that is 60 million, for instance, just to give an example. The value of the vessels are about 22, and the bank is willing to take the vessels, pass them on to another owner, maybe, or to any other vehicle, like the Commerce Bank, and they may collect maybe something. They forgive the loan to the owner, to the current owner, so maybe they're giving away 40 million, 38 million. They have the capacity to write those off. What they do is that they maintain with the new owner certain interesting cookies on the upside of the particular new loan that they will extend to the new owner, that will assume at market value the new loan. And like that, I don't know how accounting-wise that works, but if the market goes up, they will be able to be part of an equity kicker or a profit sharing. So that will, during the period of the loan, will reduce the loss. And this model is currently, to my personal experience, I've seen it with 4 banks doing that. Some in larger extent, grouping vessels, some others on individual transactions. So, this is it.
There was a good question that Visser Petropoulos made in the previous panel that touched to that, and how do you equitize debt, and what's the hope actually of getting this money back eventually. And I think you're right, there is a strong element of accounting approach and of regulatory approach. But again, this is not something that is adding new money to the market.
In reality, there is no new money, so much new money.
Well, then you answer the panel. Yeah. So, no new money. Anyway, any questions from the floor with regards to the banking scene in the West or in the East?
They know everything about banking.
Oh, the business
It's the lady here who had the rules, no? I was.
To your misery.
Well, you have the benefit of having been on both sides, the owning and the banking, so you
That's
can
right.
probably structure the best questions.
Just two things. First of all, a remark. It was very interesting to me on a recent offshore transaction involving a PSV which is being built in China. I had the opportunity to review the bank list of the Chinese builder and who were the banks that were actually financing all these vessels. I didn't recognize any of them. That's it. They were just new names.
All Asians?
All Asians, and Malaysian, Indonesian, names that some of them, I wasn't allowed to take a copy, but I remembered some of them, and I Googled them up, and they are in the top 5,000 banks. And each of them were financing 2 or 3 ships. So in a sense, just a remark to what George was saying, that we are concentrating, of course, on the big Chinese banks, and we're concentrating on them, but there's a great big number of banks which is swelling the ship financing in the area, which we are not catching at the moment.
The owner of that PSV was? From which country?
Malaysian group.
Okay, so there was a local element in that.
There's an example of a Norwegian element that was financed the way that Ted described.
Yeah, Norwegians, all kinds of people. I mean, but essentially, what you see is not the major names you would expect, the top 3 and so on. You're seeing a lot of small banks, local banks. So, in a sense, if we look at the future of the syndicated market or anything else, that's where you can do the transaction. So from DNB's point of view, yes, you can do it there, but actually your Far Eastern office over time should be able to pick up a lot of participants, potential participants, from
If I may comment on what you just said, I think you need to have, as you said, a local partner who can have a solid understanding of these banks and whether they can be in for the long run, or they are opportunistic, or they have different considerations. Because the last thing you want to have is a replication of what happened with the European banks, where, as George Campani said before, you're trying to herd in cats now that everyone has different agendas. And history shows that Asian markets can be even more volatile at times, and local banks obviously suffer in terms of funding, in terms of. But yeah, that's a
it's basically responding to where are the new lenders coming from.
Yes.
And they are coming in the Far East at the moment. Yes, in the US and yes, in other areas. But really, the Far East is providing a great multitude.
Yes.
And they're chipping away.
Because deposit rates are much higher there, and banks are much more liquid than in the West.
That's right.
And recently even more
And not only
competitive
this,
than
they are
ours.
starving for international business. Leaving aside India, that have not changed reform yet their banking system, because we are not talking about 2 or 3 main banks, we are talking about the banks that just now Mr. Petropoulos described. In Shanghai, for instance, if you walk in Shanghai, you see how many banks. All of us, we have been there, David.
The question is how do you
Beijing, the same.
how do you bridge this gap between Asian banks you just mentioned and Greek shipping? Because Greek shippers
You have to
are
open an
very
office in Singapore. That was what I saw. I just spent 6 months. I just spent 6 months in Singapore to manage the shipping team there, and I was amazed to see it, because the banking community is completely different. It was European banks that reduced, but what you see is indeed Thailand, Malaysia, Singapore, Hong Kong. It's local banks, it's Chinese banks, and still French banks are quite strong there, and a few Citi, HSBC, Stanchart. They're also a huge competition there. But what you see is that you need to have a local establishment
As a bank
to be
or
able
as an
to have access as an owner. As an owner.
You need to be committed to develop a relationship with there. Even if you are a foreign bank, as you correctly said, both international banks appeared here, they are there. They are in Asia, strong in Asia. David has done a lot of things in Asia. I mean, the bank, a leading bank. And what I want to add on what Ted said is that now the water, όπως λέμε στην ελληνικά, είναι στο Λούκι, είναι στο Αυλάκι. The flow has started, has commenced. And the first runner, as is the case, as was expected to be in China, was Exim Bank, because they started initially from the refund guarantees that they were providing at those times when ourselves, the European banks, either Dimitris when he was in AV and myself in Credilio and DVB and whatever on Analytics, we wanted to get the refund guarantee, and through this process they have become experienced, and they start in 2004, 2005, the lending, direct lending. But the real opening door was the instruction of the Minister of Finance to CDB to start international banking shipping financing. And they start with two initially schemes. One, it was for Greece, 5 billion euros, dollars, and 5 billion euros for Germany. And then all the other financing described, and we can spend a lot of hours, are linked with the development of the investments that China is doing around the world, either in Indonesia or Brazil or in Africa. And there we have as well the shipping element, where any European ship owner, and I believe many Greek ship owners, they have done it so far, they can go there and grab the opportunity to finance the new project, particularly in specialized markets. The Chinese market is starving now to go and penetrate into the offshore market. Why? First of all, in the financing, they do not believe, as many of us we do not believe, on the shape of the conventional shipping sectors in the near future, container, tanker, and dry.
Going back to Michael's comment, David, the owners that can open an office in Singapore are the ones that, in theory, are already in the radar. I mean, they have the critical mass. They're already in the radar of most banks. I mean, my question would be, would an average size owner be able to support the cost, especially in this part of the cycle, and open up an office in Singapore so as to access new money? And even if he can, would a traditional Greek shipping scheme be of interest of the small Asian bank, of the non-prime, let's say, in terms of size, Asian banks that are active in shipping? And do you have a view on that?
I saw small owners moving over, but the question indeed is whether they have the access to those banks. I don't think so. That definitely. But you see European owners moving. I saw a lot of German owners going from Cyprus to. But they moved also their senior management. CFOs are now based in Singapore, and they have access to banks. Indeed. Again, also in Europe you see it is a move to quality from the local banks, but the local banks there are definitely open for business, but I don't think they will come over to Europe. They have to finance the European owner locally there.
Dimitri, David, any other comments in that direction?
I think it's always hard to comment on specific projects like Ted raises, because there will be a local element, government pressure. I know from our Singapore branch, which has been open now for 40 years, we also have a branch in Shanghai as well. We just can't compete, even for the international owners that are active there, because of the pricing. Because once you get on the right side of the local banks, pricing, as a general guide, will probably start with a 1 rather than high 2s or 3s, which we might like to see. So, I mean, it's not bridging a gap of 10 or 20 basis points. It's blown out of the water. And I think that is forcing some banks, in fact, to international banks to have to decide if they're going to stay active in that market. I know that we, because of the size of the bank, we want to stay active in all the markets where we're present. So there has to be a way of doing business. But where there's a local element, I mean, it's really hard to touch that business. What we're doing, George, more than anybody else, is taking Greek owners, of course, predominantly, over to China. So you were expecting to see our head of Greek shipping, Christos Tsakonas, here. He's actually flying back from China now. Before that, he was in Korea. Familiar story for George as well, good for the air miles and probably not much else. But we've had, there's a lot of fruitless meetings as well. You take an owner, you think that you've made all your preparation, you've had 6 months of the groundwork, and you turn up and a different guy shows up from the bank and they don't have a clue who you are. And it is a bit frustrating, and it's taken us 3 or 4 years to lay that groundwork with China Exim. We've had several prominent people now in China Exim coming to work at D&B. As George says, we can't return the favour, unfortunately, but I'd probably be smashing my head against the wall by the end of a week in a Chinese bank. But it takes a lot of time. But with time, relationships being built up, we hope that they will stay there as well. So you have another very stable source of capital coming into the market, not a Chinese bank or a Korean bank or whatever else coming in, throwing their money around and then causing havoc when the market collapses like that. We're trying, I think all banks are working together with a common interest to source that additional capital these days.
That's something to what David was saying. Very interesting. What would greatly help Greek shipping groups would be to have a presence in the Far East. Now, in one case, the presence in the Far East, consisting of a small team, like a representative office, but located in China, has elicited a lot of visits from various banks who expressed an interest to get to know more about the company, because they took this as a sign of commitment in China. So perhaps it is a combination of factors, including setting up an office there, which will then open up these second-tier banks, because they would like to do business, but it's the client they don't know. The presence of an office has helped, and also we've seen that more and more Greeks are trying to combine the chartering with the presence of an office.
And the technical side.
Yes.
And we have time for one more question.
What is the problem with the time? It's Friday, then we have holidays.
Well, some of us.
Where is Mrs. Lowry? Do we have a problem strict on the time?
We do, because we've changed the schedule.
Thank you very much, lady.
Okay, one word I haven't heard that perhaps 20 years ago we would have heard and perhaps might be becoming more relevant is the word Japan. We say, where's the new lending coming from? Given that Japan, we see the change in economic policy, I mean the yen obviously moving, the banks are becoming more, will have more cash to lend. Does the panel think that Japan could perhaps be one of the new sources?
David, then I was there in Japan and I will tell you.
Yeah, I think there are quite a few anecdotes I can give you outside of the outside of the panel. We've tried as well to tap in the Japanese market. To be honest with you, there hasn't been a lot of vessel ordering with the US dollar yen rates. That's now shifted around, and Japan is becoming much more in focus. That's why mainly we've been doing business with Chinese banks and the Korean banks as well. Having said that, for the owners that we lend to, which is predominantly the top tier names, they of course have ordered ships in Japan, they have Japanese charterers, they have business with the trading houses which are predominant in Japan as well. And we've tried to bring in Japanese commercial banks into various syndicates, and they haven't really been ready to accept the structure, very basic structure by the way, nothing particularly complex, the structure or the pricing that the top tier owners demand. Now maybe there's a market for, I don't like to say non-top tier, but I think you know what I mean, the smaller owner or the owner that is looking to re-enter the market and arrange financing when he doesn't have an existing group of banks. And George will say that he spent some time in Japan, I'm sure, and we've tried to do the same. We've had some interesting meetings. The problems that we've run into are predominantly to do with the insurance houses in Japan, where the government banks will not lend unless they have the government insurance as well, which just makes it too expensive for the owners that we have on our books to make it of interest to them. But it's definitely a product that will be there, and as orders are coming through in Japan more and more, there's no reason why that market shouldn't be available and tapped as well.
It will also probably depend on the health of Japanese banks, I guess.
Mr. Chairman, I respect very much Ms. Caroline, and we have to stop here.
I agree.
But I have one question to four of you, being bankers, real bankers.
I'm the chairman of the banker.
Yes, but I want to take now your role as a banker. Just to see how far we are from the maturity of the newcomers in the market. How possible is for either, let's say, DVB, NAB, Citibank, AB Bank, to follow a Chinese bank as arranger? Arranger is going to be the Chinese bank, and it's coming to you to finance a big Greek ship owner. Has full underwriting. How possible is this? For your institution to accept
first, this one.
I don't want an answer. Say yes or not. Not possible. Is it possible? Yes or not? No question, because Caroline is going to hit me.
I think it's a timing issue.
All right.
And eventually,
yes or no? No.
Eventually, I think it will happen.
Now, what's happening? No.
I don't think, and you need to be fairly flexible.
You spend time.
Anything is possible. The deals that we're doing are very much club basis. We're both arrangers, but we're the agent. That's just the way it's been to establish the deals. Now we're seeing Chinese banks having a dialogue directly with the owners, and I think it wouldn't be a problem.
Possible. Dimitri?
Well, I think that the proportions are equivalent to the size of the economy. So I would see more club deals. And I would see closer cooperation between Chinese banks and European banks.
Are you going to follow a Chinese bank?
Both follow.
As agent? The agent is going to be the agent, the Chinese bank. Will you participate as a banker?
Eventually, yes, but under certain conditions. There's no answer to that. Provided that there will be, a fair deal.
Well, we are quite busy in Korea. We do a lot there with, for example, Worry Bank, who's the agent. So I don't see why we should not be able to
yes,
work with
the answer is
bank if they show the necessary level of professionalism. And we don't have that experience yet with them as an agent, but definitely time will tell.
Great. Well, thank you all. Thank you for your comments. Thank you for your insights and views. There's a slight change of program. We'll move, if you don't have, you're not too hungry, we'll move to have the presentation of power later and the last panel, and then go for lunch. I think